Chord. Okay, well, glad we sorted out that. So today we're going to deal with this really monumental problem in, well, actually, okay, before we get to Pharaoh's heart, by the way, did you get the, did you know the article by Wilson already?
No, I had not.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get to Pharaoh's heart, I want to add one last thing about the Ten Commandments, about the educational function of the Ten Commandments. So, look, the Bible is a book about God and about God's chosen people and about the relationship between the two. Okay, so it was written as an educational book for the Israelites to instruct them about their God and about themselves. Okay, and this goes back to, we once discussed, I think, this issue of whether the Bible is true. Okay, and I quoted this guy that gave a talk once at UNT, this philosopher, and he said, it depends on what kind of truth do you mean? Okay, is Genesis a geology book, telling a geological truth about the Earth's formation? Is it a biology book telling us a biological truth about the origin of our species? Is it a history book telling us kind of the truth about talking snakes and forbidden fruits? Or is it a book that tells us a moral truth about God's nature and man's nature, and about the Israelites' relationship with God? So so it depends on what you think of this book. Is it a biology book? Is it a moral book, or whatever? Now, one consistent feature, if you look at this book as a book that is telling a moral truth through these various stories, what you see as a consistent theme in the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is a focus. They all share this consistent approach in which they focus on God's impressive nature and on humans' unimpressive nature. Okay? And the result of this understanding of human nature is that a traditional religious education in whichever of these three religions transmits to the pupil a kind of a general message that your biggest problem and your greatest challenge is you. Okay, the fact that you are made of very crooked timber. Okay, so your problem is your main problem and your main struggle in life is not with society. It's not the culture. It's not the bully in your class. It's not your mayor or your governor. It's you. Okay, you're the major problem in your life. Your vanity, your ingratitude, your temper, your shallowness, your laziness and covetousness, the fact that you're such a pleasure seeker. And when you look at the Ten Commandments, you see that all of these traits, all of these negative traits that we have, produced these Ten Commandments. Okay, so they all address some unfortunate feature of human nature, and it suggests that it's these traits that trip you up and keep you back. And to succeed, you have to battle your innate character. Okay, and the reason why I brought this up is because in terms of the educational value or function of the Ten Commandments, I had a colleague who told me, we were complaining about students and what they don't know, and he told me that you cannot be upset with students for not knowing things that they had never been taught, and it's certainly true that this observation is certainly true for knowledge. like who was George Washington or why the Civil War broke out. But it goes doubly, or that it double that for moral knowledge. And you can't blame people for not knowing moral truths that they've never been exposed to. Okay, like we can't blame Cain or Lamech for not knowing that murder is wrong when they've never been taught. Okay, so and the reason why people are even less blameworthy for being morally ignorant or morally deficient than being deficient in knowledge is that when we talk about knowledge, we start at zero. Okay, you're born with zero knowledge. And then you're taught stuff, people pour knowledge into you over the world, your experience. You become more knowledgeable, but you start at zero. But on morality, we don't start at zero, we start in the red. Okay, to become moral, you have to first unlearn, you have to first come to zero. You have to unlearn virtually all your natural predispositions. Again, you've got kids, babies and little children have all the worst features that we associate with, again, these bad traits of humanity. Okay, they don't respect other people's property or feelings or privacy. They steal, they hit, they demand what they want when they want it. They lie shamelessly, brazenly. They cheat in games. They blame other people for bad things that they did. They're inconsiderate. Okay, and the only way to become a morally good person is to have a parent or some authority figure make you stop behaving naturally and teach you teach you a new and unnatural morality. Okay, a moral code that goes against these natural, your nature. And when you look at the story of humanity until now, you see that that's what God started to do first with the dietary laws that he gave Adam and Eve. Then with the law against capital punishment that he gave humanity after Abel's murder. And then the two laws that he gave Noah or gave humanity after the flood. Again, overturning the original diet and overturning the prohibition on capital punishment. Okay, and this educational program continues or God continues with his program of again, a moral education with the laws that he gave the Israelites at Mount Sinai. Okay, so you see these evolving, I think what you see in these evolving laws is a reflection of God's evolving understanding of human nature. Okay, and if you remember when we talked about the flood, God talks there, but he realizes that man's heart is evil and it's, I forget the phrasing, but from its youth. Okay, it's something that God learns to understand what these human beings are that he created. And again, he gave them a certain law about capital punishment, saw that it produced the opposite result, and then gave them a new law. Same with the diet. And okay, so I think, again, it's kind of like along the lines of what we talked last time with Moses giving a different rationale for why they're supposed to keep the Sabbath. Okay, it's the experience of the desert that makes them frame it in a new way. But again, so they're learning. Okay, so our business today is Pharaoh's heart. And like I said, this is, I think, one of the most difficult, to me, it's the most difficult story in the Bible, certainly in the Torah. And it is, I know, for countless readers and commentators throughout history. It's a very difficult story. In this episode, again, of God hardening Pharaoh's heart, introduces what are the problems that you see here in this story?
Um, determinism. Like if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, does God call the shots on everybody's heart at all times? And if so, then how is anybody responsible for whatever they do?
Right. So that's the theological problem. Okay. It again, the determinism or free will. If God is the one who directs our hearts and minds, like a hypnotist, as the text says he's doing to Pharaoh here, then you're right. You know, again, the whole issue of morality then goes out the window. Okay? We're not responsible for our actions because we don't make the choices, the moral choices that we make. You know, God is a puppeteer. So basically, in this case, Pharaoh's evil acts are not Pharaoh's. God is the evil actor. He's just direct. He's like a mob boss who hires a killer. The mob boss is the one responsible for the act, whereas Pharaoh is just a puppet. So that's the theological problem. So if I told you that there's a theological problem and a moral problem, what would the moral problem be?
That perhaps not everything is determined, but God intervened in this particular instance to harden Pharaoh's heart, but that caused Pharaoh to act evil, like act wickedly, and it caused suffering for the Israelites.
Yeah, but look, let's say, you know, fine, that's God's intention to make the Israelites suffer for whatever purpose he had in mind. But
and the Egyptians suffer as well because of Pharaoh's actions, first, like all of the plagues.
Yeah, that's true. But okay, yeah. So look, so basically, God is punishing Egypt, you know, Pharaoh or Egypt or the Egyptians for something that God made him do. Okay, you force me to do something, and then you punish me for doing it. Okay, we all understand that. Look, if you go to one of these hypnotism shows, and you know, and again, the guy, what are they called? Illusionists, but whatever. You know, if I hypnotize you and then tell you while you're under my psychic command to steal a nice TV from me, and then I prosecute you for theft, that's an injustice that screams to high heaven because you're not responsible for what you did, and yet I'm punishing you for it. Okay? Like if anyone knows that Pharaoh is blameless, it's God. You know, because God knows that Pharaoh was just a tool. Okay? So the two problems are obviously related in a way that, in the exact same way that the James Q. Wilson article discusses. Okay, so if you're again, so for him it's not God, it's neuroscience, but it's your brain chemistry or electricity. But the point is the same. If you're not control of your actions, okay, if you don't have a choice because your brain chemistry is what it is, and it determines what you see and how you understand and what you feel and what you want and how you respond to things, then how can you be morally or criminally responsible for your actions? Okay, it's the same kind of complaint about an injustice that I just made. Okay, I didn't do it. My brain chemistry compelled me. Okay, or to use biblical language, I didn't do it. My innate human nature, which God programmed into me, compelled me to do it. Okay, and I'm sure it's what Pharaoh would say if he got to read the Bible and say, hey, wait a second, so I didn't do it. God hardened my heart. God made me do it. It's not my fault. So of these two problems, which is more troubling to you? the moral problem of injustice or the theological problem of free will? Yeah, I'm not asking for the solution, but just which is a bigger, which problem is more problematic for you? Which bothers you more?
The moral problem.
The injustice problem.
Yeah, that the biblical God would demand justice, but then cause somebody to act unjustly, and then punish that individual or that nation for the injustice.
Why is this again, obviously these are two very weighty issues. Why is this a more vexing why is this harder to swallow?
In the former, it's all part of a plan that we might not understand, and we have no problem, or we can't be held. I don't know if it undermines, I guess it does undermine our morality as well, but like it just doesn't seem as like in this, like a Spinoza view, if God's calling all the shots, everything happens as a thought of the divine, then everything can't play out otherwise. Whereas in the latter way of things can go different ways, and the divine puts their hand on the scale one way or another. And if the divine puts their hand on the scale for someone to act unjustly, which causes suffering, and then punishes that individual for causing that injustice, like morality is just up in the air.
Yeah. So you're right that in the first, the theological problem simply points out that we're just robots, okay, or animals or something, and we're controlled, which is unfortunate, or it's a disillusionment, but it's not unjust. It's like, if a creator creates a robot and now the robot acts as a robot, it's too bad that the robot has this illusion that he's alive, but okay, but it's not unjust. Whereas the other problem is unjust treatment. Yeah. So I think we all accept that if a surgeon implanted a chip in your brain to direct your every thought and action, then you still do what you want, but you are not responsible for what you want. Okay? Because again, your wants and desires and your fears and impulses and decisions and everything is dictated by that chip. Okay, so the free will debate is whether you are responsible for your own thoughts and wants and fears, okay, and therefore also your actions. Okay, so are you really choosing to do what you do? To be good or bad, or kind or cruel, or wise or foolish? Or are you, again, merely a puppet on a string, obeying, again, to Wilson's point, your brain, or in our case, obeying your human nature that God had implanted in you, or even God himself directly taking control of your heart as he does here with Pharaoh. Okay, so that's so most people, thank goodness, are not philosophers. Okay, and exactly like you say, since we're not philosophers, okay, we sense injustice instinctively before we can explain systematically and rationally what makes us see this as unjust. Okay, and the result is that most people are more disturbed by actual injustice in the world than by this kind of conceptual inconsistency regarding the theoretical border between man's free will and God's power. Okay, so if you talk to people, it's interesting, it's vexing, but your heart doesn't rebel against it the way it does against injustice. And this explains why congregations have pressed rabbis and scholars and commentators for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, to address the moral problem of Pharaoh's heart more than the theological problem. Okay? Rabbis have been kind of asked, or teachers have been asked in class to justify this, to explain this, the moral problem, the injustice problem, more so than the free will problem. These classical and medieval and modern commentators thus faced repeated, again, over thousands of years, repeated challenges on this and queries on this. And the result has been that they've stepped forward, these teachers and commentators and rabbis and scholars, they've come forward to defend God against the charge of injustice. Okay. Now, the first go-to explanation offered for this problematic story is the explanation that God himself gives elsewhere in the Bible, and that is that we human beings cannot understand God's justice. Okay? We're not qualified to judge God's justice or injustice. We can't see what God sees. We can't understand what God understands. We don't have the scope of the breadth of vision or understanding, and therefore we shouldn't try. Okay? We heard God say this to Cain. We'll hear it again in the book of Job, which is dedicated to the problem of injustice. Okay, so we have God's, a ready explanation is what God himself says in his own words about this very issue. But people have had a very hard time accepting this. Okay? Cain had a hard time accepting it. And every reader who reads the book of Job also rebels against this explanation. Okay? And again, this is why theodicy is such a troubling problem in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Okay, so if we accepted God's explanation, we'd stop pestering our rabbis and ministers about theodicy, okay, which we obviously don't. Okay, so God can say that, it doesn't satisfy us, and therefore we keep asking for other explanations. So Jewish sages throughout the millennia have been forced to answer to offer answers that would satisfy us better than this answer that God gives us directly. So some rabbis say that Pharaoh was punished, that his punishment was not for this intransigence now, where God tells him, let my people go, and he doesn't. But rather his punishment is for the enslavement and cruelty towards the Israelites from years before. Okay, for his ongoing sin and cruelty. That's what the punishment is more. It's not for resisting God now. So you can see how it's this thing about hardening his heart doesn't come into play because the punishment is not for his intransigence. Others say that the hardening of Pharaoh's heart happened before Moses showed up, meaning that God again allowed Pharaoh to enslave the Israelites, and that is what the enslavement is what hardened Pharaoh's heart. Because being an enslaver hardens your heart. Okay, so it means that Pharaoh actually hardened his own heart, and God merely allowed it to happen. Okay, by allowing Pharaoh to enslave the people, he hardened his heart, and now his heart is hardened, and he's being intransigent. Other scholars, or again, ancient scholars or medieval, defend God by pointing out that Pharaoh was hard-hearted and unrepentant even when given the chance and given the early signs. And so God was right to make him sin even harder. Okay, because God didn't harden, or God doesn't harden the heart of the good, but only the hearts of the wicked. Okay, so since Pharaoh demonstrated that he has a hard heart in the first command, in the first plagues, therefore God hardened his heart later on to make him sin even worse. And others take this a bit more, take a more textual approach to this similar explanation by pointing out that if you look at the text, you'll see that the biblical author says that Pharaoh hardened his heart in the first 5 plagues. And it says that God hardened his heart in the last 5 plagues. Okay. I mean, it doesn't say it in every plague, but these terms of who hardened his heart has Pharaoh in the early ones and God in the latter ones. So, so it means that God suspended Pharaoh's free will only in the later plagues as a punishment for Pharaoh's own voluntary intransigence in the early plagues. So there are various solutions offered to the moral problem, the injustice problem of Pharaoh receiving, or the Egyptians receiving purportedly unjust punishment. Now, the problem with all of these explanations that I just railed off to you is that not only do they not address the theological problem, the free will problem, they in fact make it worse. Okay? Because by explaining how God was justified in taking away Pharaoh's free will, these commentators all give support to the notion that God can indeed take over your heart like a hypnotizer or a puppeteer. Okay, so these explainers say that yes, God did take away Pharaoh's free will, but don't worry, it's not unjust. And they explain in a variety of ways why it was justified. Okay? But the result is to reinforce this very serious theological problem. Okay, they say God can indeed reach into your brain and implant a chip in it that will dictate to you what you think, what you feel, what you want, what you fear, and of course, what you do. So, so this is the problem. We have the text itself telling us that God can control our hearts and minds, placing his will in our hearts. And then on top of the text, which is already problematic, we have all these Jewish sages and Christian sages for 2,000 years reinforcing this message with their own intellectual and spiritual authority as they try to defend God against the charge of injustice. Okay? So given the fact that they've already positioned themselves in this way, how can these sages now solve the theological problem which they themselves have so exacerbated? Okay, so how would, again, what kind of solutions can they offer to get out of this free will problem, given how they've backed themselves into a very uncomfortable position on it?
I suppose one is that God works in mysterious ways.
That's a good one. Yeah. And you're right. And that's kind of like God's explanation on the injustice issue. We don't understand, but we know that there is free will, that we have free will, and we know that God can and does control everything, including your heart. We don't know how the two can work together, but God knows. Okay, God, I don't understand, you don't understand, but God understands, and you just have to live with this seeming contradiction. Yeah. Okay. So that's one. What other, again, if you were put on the spot, what possible avenues of escape can you imagine for yourself on this?
Well, I suppose if Pharaoh deserved his heart to be hardened, then everybody else deserved whatever consequences that brought in some way or another. And all of us, insofar as the divine intervene in our free will, deserve whatever that intervention is.
But that's an injustice issue, okay? That God can and does do it, but it's just, we deserve it, either for good or ill. But just this look, the theological problem is not whether it's just or unjust, but whether we are moral beings, whether we make moral choices in life. Okay.
I suppose there's an alternative that we're not moral beings.
Right. Okay, yeah. So one is to say, actually, there is no free will. Okay, but none of them say that. Yeah. I mean, there's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are committed to the idea of free will. Okay, so you're right. That's one way out, but nobody makes it. How else can you get out of this straitjacket?
Somehow your morality was determined before you did your first act.
But again, that means that you're just a robot. You've been designed a certain way, and now you're living your robot life, making decisions that were programmed into you in advance.
It's a fix. I'm not sure.
Look, so what one solution that's offered is that yes, but it's rare. Okay, it's the rare cases defense. Okay, that overwhelmingly in life and overwhelmingly in the Bible, people have free will, but just on rare exceptions, God takes it away as He chooses. So the problem with this, of course, is that this one exception to the free will maxim opens the door to all the theodicy accusations against God that the rest of the Bible speaks against. If God really can dictate our will and our sentiments to us, if it's possible for God to turn people into His puppets, and He is willing to do so, as He obviously demonstrates here with Pharaoh, then whenever you and I see evil in the world, again, ranging from Lenin to your local neighborhood murderer, then we can and should blame God. Because God either made the villain do this, as He made Pharaoh do what he did, or God chose not to intervene and thus allowed the villain's heart to persist in his evil and commit these evil acts. But God could have prevented it. We know that God can take over, according to this rare cases approach. Okay? So this rare cases explanation lays all the world's evils at God's door, because God has chosen to allow every evil act in human history. You can think every rape, every murder, every theft, every mass murder, every fraud, every betrayal. Okay, and the one time that God reached supernaturally into a person's heart to bend that person's free will to God's will, God actually compelled that man to do evil rather than good. Okay, so the one time you deviate from your rule of free will, you make a person sin. Okay. So that's one major problem with this rare case explanation. The other problem is that the Bible itself tells us that Pharaoh was not actually a rare case. If you take a look, you can leaf through if you want. If you go to Deuteronomy 2:30, you'll see that God does it again to the Moabite king, Sichon. It says God hardened his heart and he wouldn't let the Israelites through. And God does it again in Joshua 11:20 to the Canaanites. So the Canaanites are opposing the Israelites, and it says there in Joshua 11:20 that God hardened their hearts, and on two occasions in Samuel, in 1 Samuel 18:10 and 19:9, the text says that God gave Saul kind of an evil spirit, not spirit, but put him in a bad mood, a troubled whatever. And it might be even in the story of Absalom, in 2 Samuel 17:14. 17:14.
Absalom and all of Israel agreed that the advice of Hushai was better than that of Ahithophel. And the Lord had decreed that Ahithophel's sound advice be nullified in order that the Lord might bring ruin upon Absalom.
Okay. So God, it's unclear. It doesn't say like in the other places where God inserted an evil spirit or a bad mood on what's his name, Saul, or hardened their hearts. But it sounds like Absalom accepted Hushai's advice over Ahithophel's because God wanted Absalom to make a bad move, a bad political move. Okay, so the rare cases argument or explanation has two problems. Number one, it lays all the problem of theodicy is magnified to the nth degree because it now puts all the evil acts in the world at God's feet, and the Bible tells us actually it's not that rare. God does it all the time. Okay. Another explanation, there's more kind of more mystic. I mean, it's more common in Christianity and in more mystical branches of Judaism, is that that when God interferes with our free will, he doesn't fully eliminate our ability to choose freely. He merely restricts the array of options that we can choose from. Okay. And here again, there are two problems. First, like with the rare cases, it accepts the notion that God can indeed reach into your heart and mind and control them by restricting the wealth of options that you have to decide from. And so again, it places the moral responsibility for all the evil acts in the world at God's front door. And second, again, like with a rare cases explanation, it doesn't match what the Bible says. Okay? I defy you to find a single biblical passage saying that God reduced someone's available range of choices from this many to this many, or from a lot to a few. So it's a metaphysical explanation that A, doesn't solve the problem of theodicy, or in fact, it exacerbates it, and it doesn't have textual backing. Okay? But other than those two problems, it's fine. Now, a third explanation, which I think, to me makes a lot of sense, is that I will harden his heart, or I have hardened his heart, should be read not as a statement of fact, but as a figure of speech. Okay, that this is figurative language. Okay, for example, I'll give you an example from the way we speak today. Okay, let's say that I believe that God does not involve himself in human affairs. Okay? I don't think that God causes disease and floods and ice ages and global warming and wars, etc. Okay? I still might say, God willing, when I hope something good will happen. And I still might say, thank you, God, when something good happens. Okay? Or I might say that, hey, God drew a rainbow in the sky. Or if someone's killed, I might say, oh, God took him away from us. Okay? So if you hear me say these things, you might be, you just heard my words. You might be moved to ask me, do you really think that God made these things happen? To which I'll say, oh, no, of course not. No, God doesn't make the sun rise. God doesn't make microbes attack our bodies and floods attack our cities. And he certainly doesn't make rapists attack little girls. Instead, I'll explain that I use the words God willing and thank God and God took him away from us as figures of speech that recognize God's kind of overall sovereignty in the world, but these are not statements that you should take literally as a theological sentiment that I have, that God took him or that God made the disease happen or made it not happen. It's kind of like, how, look, you and I can recognize that our city government is sovereign within the city limits. Okay? It's responsible for what happens in our city, but we don't hold the city council responsible for every good or bad thing that happens in the city. Okay? So we recognize the city's sovereignty in the world, in the city, and we might even speak about the mayor in that way or the city council, but we don't, but that's figurative language. We don't really think that if somebody urinates on the sidewalk, that's because the city did something. Okay? So the biblical author can attribute Pharaoh's obstinacy to God figuratively, just like you might attribute a child's death to God, again, figuratively, by saying that God took that child from us. Okay? Because look, we all understand that it doesn't require the miracle of divine intervention for a child to fall off a balcony or die from an illness or get murdered. Okay? So we can easily accept, and the vast majority of believing Jews, Christians, and Muslims believe that that most of these things happen naturally, not supernaturally, and not because God did it. Okay, and by the same token, but we still might use that kind of language, that figurative language that puts God, that God made this disease happen, but we don't really, or God took that child from us. But we don't think, we really do think that the child took a bad step and fell. Or again, was attacked by a microbe. And when you look at Pharaoh, when you think of Pharaoh, again, it doesn't require the miracle of divine intervention for a mighty Pharaoh to refuse to take orders from some hobo who just walked in out of the desert. Okay? In fact, we expect it. Okay? We these things happen naturally. Kings don't take orders from nobodies. Okay? So this solution that this is figurative language, that God hardened his heart, is sensible. Okay? It's more sensible that we have here an author who uses figures of speech, like all writers and all speakers do, rather than an author who thoughtlessly created this massive and glaring moral and theological problem that condemns God for the evil and the injustice in the world. Okay. Number two, okay, so it's sensible, first. Second, it has biblical support, since we see other instances all over the Bible in which the author indeed uses metaphorical language, figures of speech. Okay, so for example, when the Bible talks about God's hand doing this or that, or when God tells Cain that his brother's blood is crying out from the ground, okay, clearly we all understand, we read those things and we know for a fact that the author does not mean for us to think that God has a hand or that the blood was making sounds. Okay, the author simply assumes that we understand metaphorical language, which we do. Okay, so it's sensible, it has biblical support for it. And third, this explanation means that this story does not clash with the Bible's insistence on free will and human agency. Okay, because if we understand God hardened his heart as metaphorical, or figurative, then it means that God did not really reach into Pharaoh's heart and harden it. God did not cause Pharaoh to do this. Pharaoh did it, and we're using metaphorical language to describe it. Okay, so it means that, again, it's sensible, it has biblical backing, and it means that we're not in some sort of moral or theological conflict, because people are free to choose good or evil or anything in between. Okay, God does not and cannot control these choices. Okay. So we can walk away with this figure of speech explanation. Okay, it might be the answer. Again, like I said, it's a good and sensible answer with biblical support. And it's a sound solution to this moral and theological problem that's, again, crying out from this story. But what I'd like to do today is to suggest that maybe the author employed something more elaborate and more purposeful than a simple figure of speech. Okay, so again, I'm perfectly happy walking away with a figure of speech explanation. I think it solves everything. And it's sensible. Okay, but go ahead.
Yeah. Just a question about the figure of speech. So when you use the analogy with municipal government, when I say that, hey, the mayor could have done this, or the trustees could have done this, or somebody, or the alderman, or whatever it is, municipal government, blame it on them, I'm also like kind of being cutting in, pointing out their impotency. Like they can't, because they can't anticipate all this. They don't have that kind of power. Would this same implication be, so if God could, it's either that God doesn't have the power to, which points towards an impotency, or that if he does have the power, then it's still, he's choosing not to use it.
Right. So I think I definitely think that this solution speaks to impotency, not to God's choice not to do it.
And then the impotency has a whole host of problems as well. Like, so when we go back to like the Abraham story, why would Abraham trust an impotent God?
Why would Abraham
trust, like in the initial covenant, in an impotent God? Like, why should all these people following the biblical God trust in him if he's impotent?
Well, look, this solution does not say that God is impotent.
Right. So that's where I'm trying to.
No. It says that God is impotent vis-a-vis the human heart. Okay. So look, we have free will. Okay, and therefore, if we have free will, then God has no power over our will. Okay, but God has power over mountains and streams, and he can create miracles. He can, he has certainly power over animals, and basically everything that doesn't have free will, God has power over it. And you see miracles in which God stops the sun in one of Joshua's battles.
So,
Okay,
and God could bring on pestilence, and he could have brought on a pestilence to kill Pharaoh, so he couldn't have committed all of the evils that he did. So it goes back to that. Why doesn't God intervene in this particular
that's true. Yeah, God can kill you. That's a good point.
Yeah.
God can kill you, but he cannot make you kill yourself, for example,
right,
or make you lift this pair of glasses. Okay, so yeah, you're right that it leaves open the question of why doesn't God involve himself? Again, the issue of theodicy is still there, but it solves the question of free will. Okay, so look, the question of theodicy of injustice in the world is a persistent one in all, I'm assuming all religions, not just all monotheistic religions. You can solve, you're absolutely right, you can solve the free will problem in this story, and you're still left with the theodicy problem, because like you said, God could have, look, we'll talk about this in a second, but God could have started with the 10th plague and avoided all the human suffering caused during the 9 plagues, suffering to the Jews and suffering to the Egyptians. Okay, so you're right.
It seems like God could have just put the plague on Pharaoh,
or on Pharaoh.
Else
you're right. Yeah,
came
you're
in,
right.
And then that person would have been killed, and then a whole bunch of.
You're right.
It seemed like it would have been more deserving, more just.
Yeah. So look, you're absolutely right. When we're trying to solve the theological problem, it's related, but it's very much separate from the moral problem of injustice or of theodicy. And look, the original problem of injustice that we're talking about is, why does Pharaoh get punished for something that he didn't do? Okay, and that problem is solved by this figurative speech solution, but it still leaves open the other problem of, why does God allow it to happen at all? Why does God allow the enslavement of the Jews and their pain and suffering and everything else? So that's a problem that doesn't get solved. Look, there are 2 solutions for that are offered. Number 1 is, again, God's own words. You can't understand me. I'm not here for you to sit in judgment over me. So stop trying. And that's what he told Cain. And we can read that, the Cain story as, if you try to understand God, if you try to solve this theodicy problem, you're going to go crazy like Cain did. So stop it. Move on with your life. And then there's a host of other solutions that try to understand why God intervenes in the world sometimes, but not other times, and it's a whole science. Okay, but what we're doing here is addressing this theological problem of free will. Okay, but you're absolutely right. It does not. It doesn't. It basically clarifies that, okay, we do have free will and we're responsible for our choices in life. But that's also true of God, and so we're asking, okay, so why didn't God make the choice to kill Hitler? Okay, he doesn't have to convert Hitler to be a good person. He can just kill him. And so the question is, why didn't he? So that's a separate issue. So again, the free will problem can be solved by understanding hardened his heart as a figure of speech. That this is figurative speech and we shouldn't take it literally. Just like when we say, to your point about the mayor, the mayor made these looters, or helped these looters loot our stores, loot our city. Okay. Now we understand that what we mean is that the mayor has some sort of responsibility for how he managed the city and for not using police properly and everything else. But we know that the looters are the ones who looted the stores. The mayor, if you say that the mayor is responsible, it's a figure of speech. You don't think that the mayor paid these people or ordered these people to loot the store. Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to suggest now, so even though the solution of the figurative language addresses all the problems for free will, okay, it preserves free will completely. It has biblical support because we see it elsewhere, and it's just commonsensical, that again we use language this way. So again, this is a theory, a suggestion of something more elaborate on the part of the author. Okay, when you look at the story, why doesn't Pharaoh? Why do you think Pharaoh doesn't believe Moses and Aaron are messengers from the God of the universe? Why doesn't he believe that they are what they say they are, and thus obey their command? Do you think, based on what you've read, that he doesn't believe them, or do you think that he does believe them, but simply doesn't want to obey the Jewish God?
So I think if it were the latter, he'd also have to think that the Jewish God wasn't that powerful. Like if he said he just doesn't want to obey the Jewish God, then you'd also have to think that he doesn't have, like, the Jewish God doesn't have the power to make him believe or make him do what it
right.
is.
Yeah, but, or at least that he thought he thinks that the Egyptian gods are stronger. But yeah, you're right. But the question is, but again, I'm just asking for your impression. When you read the story, was your sense that he doesn't believe them, or that he does believe them, but he's saying, "Screw you, and you're God"?
It seems like he puts him in competition, like the Jewish God in competition with the Egyptian, like when he has them have these kind of contests and things with the snakes, or the staff and the snakes, and then the snakes eat the other snakes, and all this kind of stuff going on. It seems like it's not definitive in his mind.
Well, okay, look. So if you look at that story with the staff and the snake, or whatever it is, let's see, it's 7, chapter 7. Yeah, so wait, chapter 7, 8. Yeah, so God tells Moses and Aaron, if Pharaoh tells you to give him a sign that you're not just two schmoes, tell Aaron, take your staff and it'll become an alligator. And they did so. Okay, and then Pharaoh does the same thing. And then the same thing in 20 with the blood. And again, he does it, and then the Egyptian magicians do the same thing. And then the same thing with the frogs. Okay, he brings, Moses brings the frog. This is in chapter 8, 2:3. He brings forth the frogs, and the magicians do the same thing. Okay, so what does this suggest here? So again, it's not, we don't have to kind of, does he believe or not believe? Does he believe and defy them, or does he not believe that they really are messengers of a mighty God? What do these indicate?
It seems like Pharaoh believes that there's magic, and that it's not unique to the biblical God.
There's no reason for him to believe that these two wanderers are the messengers of God. Because if Pharaoh's priests can perform the same miracles as Moses and Aaron, then Moses's magic tricks are not proof that Moses's God is some sort of supreme God who's more powerful than our gods and our priests and our magicians. Okay? So the point is that Pharaoh cannot, it's impossible for Pharaoh to believe in God, that these two people are the messengers of this mighty God of the universe, because Moses has not provided good enough proof of God's existence and God's power. So why does Moses do this? Because God told him. He said, if Pharaoh doesn't believe you, if Pharaoh wants a sign that I am who I say I am, do these 3 tricks. Okay? So Moses does them. Okay. But the point is that God sent Moses with 3rd grade magic tricks that cannot convince Pharaoh. Okay, Pharaoh would have to be the dumbest king in Africa to believe that Moses is a messenger from a mighty God. Because he's got his own clerks and magicians who can do the exact same thing. Okay? So God told Moses to perform, to give signs, to give Pharaoh proof that is by definition not proof. Okay, Pharaoh cannot be convinced in God's existence or in God's might. Okay, but at this point, again, if you read 8 during the 3rd plague, the frogs, in 8:13-15. 8:13-15.
So I have 8:13 is, and they did so. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust.
In 12. Okay, so God tells Moses to tell Aaron to do, and they bring in bring up lice from the earth. Okay, and then they infest everything, and at that point the Egyptians try to reverse it, and they cannot undo the lice. Okay, and the Egyptians now, was it verse 15. The priests or magicians tell Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. Again, speaking of metaphorical language, the finger of God. Is that how it's in English for you? The finger of God?
Yeah, this is the finger of God.
Okay. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he wouldn't listen to them, or wouldn't listen to them as God spoke, or God conveyed. So the Egyptians start suspecting here with the lice that Moses' God really is a powerful God, because they can't compete anymore as they did with the first 3. And likewise, the Egyptians notice that the plagues afflict all of Egypt except for the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived. Okay, so because of these 2 things, they start saying, okay, so maybe this is the real deal. Maybe Moses and Aaron are the real deal. But Pharaoh remains unconvinced even when the priests are convinced. Okay, so why are these next plagues, okay, from the 4th to the 9th, okay, the various pests and diseases and hail and locust and darkness at noon, why are these still insufficient for Pharaoh? Why are they insufficient proof for Pharaoh?
It seems because his heart was hardened. Like, whereas the magicians and everyone were convinced after this, the only reason Pharaoh wasn't, it seems, was because his heart was hardened. Right,
but again, if it wasn't, so it could be because, again, God reached into his heart and hardened it. Okay, but if that's, again, we let's put that to the, so that's obviously one explanation, but it creates all sorts of problems for us, as we discussed, both moral and theological. If we're trying to find a solution that can live in peace with the Bible's insistence on free will, okay, what's another explanation for why Pharaoh can persist in his doubt in plague 4 through 9? Okay, we know that the 10th convinced him. Okay, so why in 4 through 9, other than the supernatural explanation?
So it could be that they're just Aaron and Moses are just better magicians than the Egyptian magicians. Would he explain the magician's tricks as being supernatural?
That's a good question. They might be magic tricks like ours, and they might be divine, like Egyptian gods perpetrating miracles. But either way, let's assume the latter even. Okay, if the Jewish God, if Moses' God can do something that the Egyptian gods cannot, that's proof that this is really a mighty God. Okay, a mighty spiritual force. Look, let me ask you this way. If I came to you and performed gave you these signs, again, 4 through 9, okay, lice and some sort of skin disease and creepy crawlers and hail and darkness at noon, etc. Would you be convinced that I'm God, or that I'm God's messenger?
It would be convincing that an alternative, be convincing that there's supernatural forces that you have access to, but so far those supernatural forces perhaps didn't hit home for me. Like what I care most deeply about still isn't really influenced. So those are great tricks, but that's all okay, you got.
No, I'm asking you this seriously. If I told you I am God's messenger, okay, I am the second coming, okay, and let me prove it to you. Tonight or today, I will darken the sun during the day, and it happens. Or I come to you the next day and say, today there will be a plague of locust, and it happens. And lice and hail, etc. Would you really believe, and I'm asking seriously, would you believe that I am the second coming of Christ?
My modern perspective, you think it was a trick.
What? Look, I know you will. I know you will. And my question is why? Why would you not? Look, these are obvious. These are seemingly amazing, inexplicable things. But I'm 99% sure, or 90% sure, that most people would not believe it. And I'm asking, why would they not? Including Pharaoh.
I think part of the explanation could be that he has magicians of his own. So he's already seen things that he can't quite account for, but doesn't necessarily think that equates power, because those magicians are still under Pharaoh's power. That's
true, but you don't have magicians, okay? And you wouldn't believe me either.
I've seen things that I can't quite explain or don't quite completely understand, like even like seeing how like TVs and computers work. I don't understand every little piece of how it works.
That's a good point. Here, I'll turn on this television. Ta-da! Okay. No, but look, you're absolutely right, and especially, and it goes, and it's even more something. Not only have you seen things in life that you can't explain that seem miraculous, but you know they're just part of life. Specifically, all these things, plague 4 through 9, are known phenomena that you have seen in your life. You've seen disease, you've seen pests, you've seen extreme weather, you've seen a solar eclipse. Okay, we've all seen them, and we know them as natural occurrences. Okay, so the Egyptians might have seen these phenomena as wholly natural, again, solar eclipses, hail, lightning. So they might have seen them as wholly natural occurrences or as ordained by the gods. But the point is, they've seen them before, many times, as you and I have. Okay? Now, granted, the last 2 plagues were extreme versions of natural phenomena. Okay? The eclipse was an extremely and unnaturally long eclipse. Okay? It lasted 3 days. And the hail was, again, extremely unnaturally heavy, with large balls of hail that could kill man and beast, coming down with flashes of fire, lightning. But, even if hail and lightning storms are rare in Egypt, the Egyptians were world conquerors and world traders. Okay? They did know the world farther north. And they've seen, like you and I have seen, heavy storms with hailstones that can kill and lightning that can break trees, as it says here. Okay? And the darkness too. Okay? It's longer than what Pharaoh knows from previous eclipses, but it's an eclipse. Okay? And the fact that in the land of Goshen there was light, we know that from every eclipse. It's a full eclipse between these latitudes or longitudes, whatever. But on the edges, it becomes a partial eclipse. Okay, so there is light over there, even though it's dark here. Okay, it's a known feature of solar eclipses. Okay, so critically, the first 2 plagues the blood and the frogs, those 2 are not natural phenomena. Okay? Of all the first 9 plagues, only the first 2 could be convincing as true miracles. Because nobody has seen water turn to blood. And frogs, unlike locusts and unlike lice, frogs do not infest our streets and homes like locusts and lice and bugs and disease, etc. Okay? And that's exactly why the biblical author needs to tell us that the Egyptian priests could replicate these unnatural things, the blood and the frogs, as magic tricks. Okay? Because without this element in the story, without the Egyptian magicians replicating these 2 things, we really wouldn't understand why Pharaoh isn't convinced that God is God. Okay? The blood and the frogs would be good proof. Okay? These are unnatural events that nobody has seen before. But that was not the case, because Pharaoh has seen them before from his own magicians. So you and I would be impressed, but Pharaoh is not impressed. Okay? He cannot be impressed by these first 2 plagues because he's got his own magicians who do the same thing. And he can't take them as proof that God is God. And the next 7 plagues, he likewise, he can't be convinced by them because you and I wouldn't be convinced by them. These were known natural phenomena. Okay, we've all seen them before. Okay, so God sends Moses with signs that can't convince, with a trick with the staff, and then with the plague of the blood and the frog, and then another 7 that can't convince because they're natural occurrences. What, disease, locust? That's what was supposed to convince me to overturn my whole world and free all my slaves. Okay, So we can understand why Pharaoh is not convinced. Okay, that again, it doesn't require, again, it doesn't require divine intervention for a rational man to not be convinced by the first 9 plagues. Okay, but the 10th plague, that's where we and Pharaoh clearly see a miracle performed by a powerful God. Okay? This is not a disease, okay, because it kills only the firstborns. There's no such disease. It's not a disease because it kills in an instant. Again, so diseases don't do that. It's not a disease because it struck throughout Egypt at the same time, at the stroke of midnight. Stroke, yeah. And it killed humans and animals alike. Okay, so this was not natural. It was not known, and it was not something that anyone else could replicate. This is proof positive. This is a true miracle. And so now I believe, I have to believe, and I have to obey, which he does. Okay. So when we talked about the Abraham story, we discussed the problem of how one can possibly believe something without proof. Okay? And Abraham demanded a miracle so that he would believe. Jacob also demanded a miracle. Okay? They could not believe in God based on faith, but they could based on proof. Okay? Based on a clear and incontestable supernatural miracle. Okay? So look, if Abraham needed a miracle to believe in God, if Jacob needed a miracle to believe in God, if Moses needed a miracle with the burning bush, and if the Israelites themselves needed miracle after miracle after miracle in the desert, then why should we chastise Pharaoh for wanting proof? Okay, that meaning that he wanted to see a real miracle before he believed. Okay, this is the standard MO in the Bible. Okay, so the point of this observation regarding the plagues is that God never control. Again, if you're looking for a way to understand this, look, if there is a contradiction in the Bible between the Bible's insistence on free will and this story, then fine, then there's a contradiction and the author didn't notice it. Fine. Or the author wants us to just accept it, that we don't understand the contradiction, we can solve it, but accept it and live with it. Fine. But this problem can point us to a variety of possibilities that might be very sensible, that solve this problem, that clarify that the author is not creating a major theological problem for Judaism. Okay? One way to solve it is understanding this language as figurative. The other is understanding these plagues as something that doesn't require God to supernaturally reach in and harden your heart. Okay? So the point is that God never controlled Pharaoh like a puppet. Okay? God didn't compel Pharaoh's heart to be hard and intransigent. Okay? God does not and cannot, according to Judaism, compel anyone's heart. Okay? What happened here is that God simply manipulated Pharaoh. Okay? God was playing a mind trick on Pharaoh. God encouraged Pharaoh to remain skeptical and strident by choosing to give Pharaoh evidence that was not compelling enough. God chose crappy miracles. Now, why take miracles from the natural world? Why take miracles that the Egyptian magicians can perform, magic tricks? Okay, so Pharaoh persisted in his skepticism in the same way that we saw Abraham persisting in his skepticism. Okay? The Torah never shows us blind faith. Not from Abraham, not from Jacob, not from Moses, not the Israelites, and not from Pharaoh. Okay? They all come to know God. They come to understand that God is God by his miracles. Okay? And look, when I asked you about why wouldn't you, what miracles would pass muster with you, if you look into your own heart, you'll acknowledge that miracles must pass a really high bar to be accepted as true miracles. There's this joke about a guy who was looking for parking in Tel Aviv, which is a mission impossible. And so he drives up and down the streets, time after time, looking for parking, forever. And then in exasperation, he raises his eyes to the heavens and says, God, if you find me a spot, I promise I'll keep kosher and go to synagogue every Friday. And then he lowers his eyes, and right in front of him is this beautiful, wide open parking spot. And so he looks back up at the skies and says, never mind, I find one myself. Okay, so what's the joke here? We're like, well, why is this funny? If we're committed to ruining a joke by explaining why it's funny, why is this funny?
Because it's easy. It's easy to credit things that aren't that don't wow you to just natural happenstance.
Exactly. Look, we all recognize that this is true, that this response by this driver is true. We would do the same thing because an empty parking spot is not miraculous. Even in Tel Aviv, it's not a miracle. Okay. So look, we all suspect that if you hear a voice speaking to you, telling you to do stuff, you just like Abraham will be conflicted. Is this God or am I crazy? When we talked about God, we were talking about which is the most amazing act that Abraham performed. Is it killing his son because God told him to, or leaving his homeland, leaving his family because God told him to? And I think we agreed that it was the first one. It was the first act of obedience, the leaving home. Because by the time he sacrificed Isaac, Abraham had a long relationship with God in which God consistently proved himself and performed miracles and everything else. And so God knew that God really is God by the time he lifted that dagger. But he knew nothing about this voice when he left his home. Okay, so that's the real leap of faith. Okay, so if you heard a voice, you would wonder, just like Abraham did, is this really God or am I crazy? And the same goes for visions. Okay, if you saw a vision of God talking to you, again, you'd wonder, am I going crazy or is this really God? Okay. And if that voice promised you that your 90-year-old wife would have a baby, you'd laugh just like Abraham did. You'd realize, okay, I guess I've been crazy all along. I was wondering, am I crazy or is this God? Turns out I was crazy. But then when it comes true, and you're not the only one who sees this vision, other people can see that this is a real live boy, then you understand that I wasn't crazy. This really, it had been God all along. Okay? So the same thing goes for these silly magic tricks and the extreme weather and the plagues. Okay? So if a stranger told you that he's God's messenger, and he tried to prove it to you by, sawing a lady in half and then putting her back together again, or, pulling a rabbit out of a hat. See, I'm God's messenger. You would not believe him, just like Pharaoh. And then because again, you've seen this magic trick. And then the guy said, okay, if that doesn't convince you, here, I'll prove to you that I'm God's messenger. I'm giving you a weather forecast, and the weather forecast comes true. Of course you'd remain skeptical. Yeah, it's going to rain tomorrow. Okay, and it rains. Okay, that doesn't, I'm not going to, I don't believe you. That's not enough. Okay, so your heart would remain hard. Okay, your heart, like Pharaoh's heart, would remain resistant to God's message naturally and understandably, not supernaturally. It's not that God hardened your heart. It's that God gave you signs that are insufficient to melt your heart or to transform your heart. Okay, it's reasonable and rational for you to keep doubting this stranger who claims to be a man of God. Okay, so what kept Pharaoh's heart hard was Pharaoh's reason, not God's supernatural intervention. Okay. Now, at some point, the stranger, Moses, the stranger moves from simple magic tricks to accurately predicting the future. Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. Okay, he predicts not only when the pestilence will come, but also when it goes away. When the locust would come, when it would leave. When the hail would come, and when it would stop. The eclipse, etc. Okay, so at that point, if that happened to you, if you were Pharaoh, or you're in that situation, your skepticism, your natural and rational skepticism would start wavering. Okay, your rational faculties now make you wonder whether you really are seeing the hand of God. Okay, whether this is a genuine supernatural miracle rather than a natural weather phenomenon or locust coming in. Okay, and that's exactly what you see Pharaoh going through. Yeah, you see him in the later plagues, he's wavering. He's vacillating between reasonable skepticism and reasonable faith. Remember, he says, okay, I believe it. And then he changes his mind. And then he believes again, and then changes his mind. Okay, so if it's all magic tricks and natural phenomena, then reason dictates continued skepticism and resistance to Moses. But if these really are miracles, then reason dictates accepting that Moses really is a messenger of some super God. Okay, so what you see here in Pharaoh is that his reason, his rationality, is what's responsible for his hard heart, for his intransigence. Okay, just like you when you find a parking spot in Tel Aviv. Okay, reason dictate that God didn't part the cars for you and create a parking space. Okay, so again, it's God's role in this. The way God hardens Pharaoh's heart, as the text tells us, is not by compelling his heart or his mind to think X rather than Y. Okay? God hardens Pharaoh's heart by choosing to give Pharaoh subpar evidence. Evidence that cannot dispel a rational man's natural and reasonable skepticism. Okay, so look, God, I'm assuming, everyone knew that Pharaoh is, not a dummy, man of science, man of reason. Okay, God could have given Pharaoh compelling and irrefutable, a compelling and convincing miracle right off the bat. He could have killed all the firstborns in Egypt in the first plague. Okay, and likewise, he could have given Abraham a compelling and irrefutable miracle at the age of 70, rather than waiting until Abraham was 100 years old. He could have. He chose not to. Okay, he chose to keep Abraham wondering, doubting, etc., etc. Same thing with Pharaoh. Okay, so God chose to encourage Pharaoh's skepticism by offering simple magic tricks. Okay, like the staff, the blood, the frogs. And then he further encouraged Pharaoh's skepticism with, again, naturally occurring plagues like diseases and pests and extreme weather. Okay, so according to this this reading, God did harden Pharaoh's heart. Okay, it's not a figure of speech. Okay, but God hardened Pharaoh's heart not by supernaturally kind of invading his body and compelling his heart, again, supernaturally, which is beyond God's power in Judaism, or according to the Bible. Okay? Instead, God hardened Pharaoh's heart by playing mind games on Pharaoh. Okay, just like, look, if you and I are playing chess, I can make you, I can impel you, I can make you make a certain move that I want you to make. I'm not supernaturally hypnotizing you. I'm not psychically compelling you to do what I want, but I'm playing a mind game on you. Okay? I'm taking advantage of your reason or of your psychology, and I'm laying a trap for you. Okay, I'm enticing you, encouraging you with one act to do what I really want you to do. Okay, so if I lay a trap for you and coax you into that trap, this does not represent a theological problem regarding free will. You have free will. Okay, I'm not taking over your brain. Okay, in fact, it's the opposite. Okay, because you're free to choose, I stack the deck here to tempt you to make the choice I want you to make. I'm dangling my queen, knowing that reason will dictate to you, hey, I got this opportunity, I'm going to jump on it. And then, haha, you fall into my trap. Okay, so it's not a free will problem. In fact, it's a free will vindication that I was able to play a mind game on you. Okay, so you can see this exact dynamic. We will be able to see this exact dynamic again in the book of Samuel. Okay, in Samuel 4, the Philistines, I don't know if you remember this episode, they capture the Ark of the Covenant. You know, they defeat the Israelites and capture the Ark. And then in chapters 4 and 5, they suffer various plagues, hint, hint, and their gods suffer these funny humiliations in front of the captive Ark. They keep falling on their faces, the Philistine gods. And the Philistines, just like Pharaoh, they start to wonder if this is just a coincidence or if this is a supernatural event in which the Israelite God is taking his anger out on them. Okay, but they don't know. They really are wondering, and so their priests design a kind of experiment. I mean, you can. I don't know if you're familiar with this, where they hook the Ark of the Covenant to I think 2 or 4 oxes, and I guess they try to divine whether it's supernatural or not. In any case, you can read it in Samuel 6, First Samuel chapter 6. But basically, it's, if this happens, then we'll know that the Israelite God was the one striking at us. But if Y happens, then we were simply victims of a string of naturally occurring misfortunes. Okay, so like I said, we can solve our problem, our free will problem. So again, this story is a serious challenge for thousands of years now to this monotheistic insistence on free will. Okay. A good solution is the figurative speech solution. This explanation that I just laid out for you is not, hardening his heart is not a figure of speech. It's true, okay? Just like when I say in a chess match, I made you do that, okay? It's not a figure of speech in the sense that I really did make you do that. Again, it's not that I compelled you, but I played a mind trick on you that made you do what I wanted you to do. Okay, so again, these are two explanations that I think are more effective than the rare cases or the more mystical one about shrinking your number of choices, because A, they're based on the text, and B, they they're based on the text, they're reasonable, and they assume that the author is wise enough to not perpetrate a massive contradiction, a massive theological contradiction in this theological book.
It would bring up a question. So when we were talking about Abraham, we were talking about the biblical God learning kind of about people through Abraham's kind of reluctance to believe a time and time again until he got to a certain point. But now he's starting all over. Like, it seems like he'd already learned that lesson, that it takes a big miracle, like in the case of Abraham, to get people to believe that you have what you say you have. Why didn't he do that with Pharaoh? Why did he start? The question is, he still hardened his heart by doing this mind game. Why?
Right, but look, you're absolutely right to wonder this, but God is clearly not learning something afresh. He knows. Right. Okay? He's hardening Pharaoh's heart by choosing to give him crappy evidence. Okay, so it's not that he's learning. He knows human beings by now. Thank goodness, finally.
Well, it even makes me think back. Did he know that about Abraham too? I don't.
If you ask me, I would say yes. Okay, because look, I suspect that, look, God is meeting Abraham halfway all the time. Okay, he's offering him more signs and better signs, and not just a vision, but also not just a voice, but also a vision. And he saves him here and saves him there. It seems like he could convert Abraham like that. Okay. It's like he's trying to get to know Abraham and to see this struggle in Abraham, and so that when he finally comes through for Abraham and offers him the ultimate miracle, that'll stick, because Abraham has been struggling with this for 40 years, with this faith issue, and it's. So let's talk about, why is God doing this to Pharaoh? Okay, it's clearly, again, if you buy this explanation, that it's not a figure of speech, but he was hardening his heart by playing a chess match with him. Why did he want Pharaoh to resist and resist and resist and resist and resist 9 times or 10 times? Okay. If he laid a trap for Pharaoh, inducing Pharaoh to disbelieve what his eyes showed him, why did he do it? Well, for whose benefit? Why go through this whole game leading Pharaoh to get God why go through this process in which you induce Pharaoh to make God inflict more spectacular plagues and more suffering and more pain on the Egyptians. Okay, so why would God want Pharaoh to say no, 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 no?
So if I
Don't guess, because the text says it. The text tells you.
why did he want? We wanted Pharaoh to let the Israelites go on their way.
Well, yeah, but so look, eventually he wants Pharaoh to let them go. But in the meantime, for 9 plagues, he's purposefully giving Pharaoh crappy signs, crappy evidence. Okay. And he's doing it to harden his heart, to make him say no. Okay. He's not giving him evidence that's so compelling that he'll say yes until the 10th plague. Okay. So why does he want Pharaoh to say no, which will then allow God to inflict more spectacular plagues on the Egyptians and create more suffering and more pain, etc.?
For the benefit of the Egyptians, so they all see this great power.
Exactly. Look, again, our method here is to follow the text. We're not building stuff on top of the text, but really trying to understand the author based on what the author says. Again, not extrapolating or creating exegesis separate from the text, okay, or bringing stuff from outside the text. Okay, we're just working with what the author tells us, and the author tells us, okay, that look, there are 2 options. That God did this to either demonstrate his might to the Egyptians, or to demonstrate his might to the Israelites. Okay, and fortunately or unfortunately, the text tells us both answers. Okay, look, biblical commentators, and you're right. God says it. I want the Egyptians to see who I am and that I am in charge, etc., etc. Okay. So biblical commentators have observed that God's first 9 plagues are launched on the water and the earth and the skies. Okay, 3, 3, and 3. Okay, and you can follow you can identify this by looking at Moses's staff. Okay, he hits the water for the blood and the frogs. Actually, okay, sorry, it's not 3, 3, 3. It's 2, 4, 2, 5, and 3. 2. Does that add up? 2.
2, 5, and 3 is 10.
Yeah, no, that's 10. So 2, 4, and 3. That's it. So the first 9 plagues. So he hits the water with the staff to produce the blood and the frogs. Then he hits the ground for the lice and the critters and the disease, whatever it is. And then he hits the ground, and then he hits and he waves it in the air to summon the locust and the darkness and the hail. Okay, so these commentators. So again, the water, the earth, the sky, the air. So these commentators who have made this observation say that this illustrates to the Egyptians that the Israelite God holds all of Egypt in his hands, okay, commanding the water, the earth, and the heavens. Okay. And relatedly, there's a claim that I don't know Egyptian the Egyptian pantheon well enough or at all, so I can't speak to this, but I know that there's a claim that the 10 plagues, or at least the 9, no, I think the 10, were directed against the Egyptian gods. Okay, the Nile god turned to blood. darkness blotting out the sun. There's a frog goddess. There's in the pestilence plague, it's seen as an attack on the ox god, whatever his name is. The god of death, the 10th plague is an attack on that. And the idea here is that that God sets out to demonstrate to the Egyptians, meaning to the world, the most powerful empire in the world, demonstrate to them that God is the one true God. Okay, here I am attacking all of your gods and overpowering them. Okay, so I'm more powerful than Pharaoh, more powerful than Egypt's lesser gods, like the frog and the ox, more powerful than their powerful gods, like the Nile, and more powerful than their central god, like the sun. Okay, and this lines up well with what God Himself says, as you rightly noticed. And look, you noticed it without remembering that you noticed it. Okay, when I asked you who's He doing it for, He said maybe to demonstrate to the Egyptians His power and His might. So if you read Exodus 7, verse 3, 7:3. Yeah, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my plagues in the land of Egypt, and Pharaoh will not listen to you. And I will strike Egypt and bring the multitudes of my people out of the land of Egypt with great signs or acts or plagues, and the Egyptians will know that I am God, as I how do you have it? Kind of take my hand over Egypt and take the children of Israel from within it. Okay, so I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he won't let the Israelites go, and I will afflict the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will thus know that I am God. Okay, and you can see this again in verse 17. No. 18. Yeah, okay, I can't find it here now. Okay, so it says it a number of times that that he wants the Egyptians to see and feel it. Okay, where is it? Where's the blood? Here.
Water. Now turn to blood. The fish all died. Let's see.
Yeah, I can't. Okay, never mind. Oh, here it is, 17. So God said, in this you will know that I am God, and I am kind of striking with the with the staff, that I did this to the Nile. And again, you'll see it in chapter 8, verse 6, after the frogs. Okay, 6. And he said, for tomorrow, so that you would know that there is no God as our God. Okay, and again in 9:14 to 16. 9:14. Because now I'm sending this plague on you and all your people. so that you will know that there is none like me in all the land. Okay, and I did this to you. And then in 9:29-30, and Moses said that, I will do this with the hail, so you would know that this land belongs to God. And you, in verse 30, and you and your slaves, or you and your people, I knew because. How does your version translate verse 30?
But I know that you and your courtiers not yet fear the Lord God.
Okay, good. So again and again and again. Oh, and again before the splitting of the Red Sea. Let's see. This is in 14. 16 to 18. 16. Here it is. So he tells Moses, lift your staff and kind of over the water, and lead the Israelites through the dry land. And I will, and here I am holding the heart of Egypt, and they'll follow you. And oh, and in verse 18, and thus the Egyptian will know that I am God. Okay, in striking the Egyptians. Okay, but then, okay, so we have all these statements by the author, and sometimes in God's own voice, that he wants the Egyptians to know. He's doing this, and he wants to multiply the plagues. This is why he's not starting with the 10th plague. He wants them to say no, so that he will then inflict more and harsher, to send a more powerful sign. I'm doing this to you here, and the land, and the water, and the sky, and to your gods, and I'm overpowering you everywhere. Okay, so that the Egyptians will know who I am, or so that the world will know who I am. Okay, but then look at chapter 10, verse 1 and 2. Okay, do you see?
So I have, then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his courtiers, in order that I may display these my signs among them.
By the way, just as an aside, you remember we talked about the word slave, and how in Hebrew it's slave for slave, and servant, and subordinate, and minister. So in Hebrew it says slaves here, but your translator correctly says that it's not for the Egyptian slaves to see, it's for Pharaoh's ministers. So yeah, but again, the word slave is has to be interpreted by context, because the word slave can mean a variety of things in biblical Hebrew and still in modern Hebrew. Okay, sorry, go ahead. So for I've hardened his heart and the heart of his courtiers, so that
that I may display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your sons and your sons' sons how I made a mockery of the Egyptians and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you may know that I am the Lord.
Okay. So we just read all these instances where God, or the author, is telling us God wants to inflict these signs, these plagues on the Egyptians, so that the Egyptians will know who I am, or that the world will know who I am. Again, this is the mightiest empire in the world. But here it says that no, it's not for the Egyptians to see who I am and to understand who I am and to remember who I am. It's for the Israelites to know that God is God. Okay, so that they, I want this to be such a strong sign, not just one plague and we're done. I want this to be staggering. 10 plagues, devastating again, the water, the earth, the sky, the gods, etc., so that the Israelites will remember this miracle and remember that God is God. And again, if you go forth to 11, chapter 11, verse 4 through 7. Yeah.
Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, toward midnight I will go forth among the Egyptians, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, for the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the millstone, and all the firstborn of the cattle, and there shall be a loud cry in all of Egypt, such as has never been and never will be again. But not a dog shall snarl at any of the Israelites, at man or beast, in order that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel."
Right. Okay. So that you would know, you the Israelites, so that I'm doing this. This is the 10th plague. Okay. But by the way, what do you call the 10th plague in English?
What do you mean? Just
Oh, you just call it the 10th plague? There's no. Okay. So in Hebrew, it's called the plague of the firstborns. Okay. So, okay. So he's saying, I'm about to do this amazing one, the coup de grace, so that you, the Israelites, will know how God separates between Egypt and Israel. You know, that I am taking care of you. I'm killing everybody else, but not you. Okay. And add to that if you can add to these statements also, actually, if you go to chapter 12, verse 12 to 14, and here, and I went through the land of Egypt this night and struck every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, and in all of God, and in all of Egypt's gods, I will make kind of a mockery, or I will abuse them, for I am God. And this blood, the blood that the Jews are supposed to smear on their doorposts, and this blood on your doors is a sign that you are there, and I will see the blood and pass over your houses, and your houses will not will not suffer my attack, okay, on the firstborns. And this day shall be a memory for you, like a holiday, and you celebrated it as a holiday to God for generations, forever. You will celebrate it. And then he explains, that you'll sit for 7 days and eat matzahs and everything else, how to celebrate the holiday. Okay, so again, I'm doing this for you, so that you will. I want to make an impression on the Israelites, so that they will remember it. And he's even explaining to them how they should remember it, how they should commemorate this with the Passover holiday. And add to that the miracles Moses performed for the Israelites when he introduced himself to the Israelites. When he and Aaron come in and introduce them again. This is go back to chapter 4, 1 through 9. Okay, so Moses is telling God at the burning bush, okay, but they won't believe me, and they won't listen to me, because they will say, God, you're not God's messenger. Okay, and God says, here, take this. This is what you should do. You should throw your staff on the ground, and it'll become a. He throws it on the ground, and it becomes a snake. Okay, and Moses runs away. And then God instructs him, no, you hold him by the tail, and whoop, it becomes a staff again. Okay, so he said, and now God says, so that they will believe you, basically do this trick for them. And then he does another trick where Moses puts his hand under his underarm, and it comes out, was it leprosy? Yeah, white with leprosy. And he puts it back in, and now it's clean. And so he says, if if they, God tells Moses, if they don't believe you and don't listen to you with based on the first sign, with the staff turning into a snake, they'll believe you based on the second sign. And if they don't believe both signs, then take from the waters of the Nile and put them on dry land, and they will and the water will become blood once you put them on the land. Okay, so so again, and you add to that, where is it? Where is it? Okay, and so all this then happens in chapter 4, and then at the end of chapter 4, in verse 30, they do, Aaron and Moses do all these things and perform these tricks, and then in 31, and the people believe them that God indeed has come to liberate the people, and that God remembered them, and they bowed to Moses and Aaron, or to God. But the point is that, again, that the miracles are performed so that to convince the Jews that, hey, I am God, I'm the God, I'm coming for you, believe it, remember it, celebrate it, etc. And then on top of these, in Egypt, there's all the miracles in the desert. Okay, the pillar of smoke in the daytime, a pillar of fire leading them at night, parting the sea, defeating the mightiest army in the world, providing water where there is no water in the middle of the desert repeatedly, providing food when there's no food. You think of the audio visual extravaganza at Mount Sinai, the earth swallowing Korah's clan, that rebellious clan against Moses, the speaking donkey, Balaam's speaking donkey, numerous miracles, too many to recount, no, not too many to recount, but numerous ones, okay? So God is pouring on the miracles in Egypt, after Egypt, to prove to his chosen people that he really is who he says he is, okay? That he is the real deal. Okay, so we saw with Abraham and with Pharaoh that God understands that people need proof to believe in God. Okay, and he plays this game with Abraham, and eventually the trump card to seal the deal. Same thing with Pharaoh. Okay, so God provides bona fide miracles for the Israelites in Egypt and in the desert, repeatedly, time after time, even more than he did for Abraham. Okay, so according to this, so we have these citations that say that God is doing this for the Egyptians to see and to understand who he is. And then we have the second batch of citations saying that no, he's doing this for the Israelites to see and understand who he is. And that basically the second batch of citations says that he indicate that he's making an example of Egypt to, literally to make history. Okay, God is taking on the greatest power in the world and really just grounding and pounding it mercilessly so the Israelites will remember this, okay, that they'd be so awed by God's might and the lengths that God went for them, that they'd be talking about this for the next 3,000 years. Okay, and indeed, the Jews have been doing exactly that for 3,000 years. Every Passover at the Passover table, every Friday night as they bless the candles, every Sukkot, every Shavuot, actually, look, if you flip to Exodus 12, Exodus verse 21 to 24.
So I have Moses then summoned all of the elders of Israel and said to them, go pick up out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of the hyssop, dip into the blood that is in the basin, and apply some blood that is in the basin to the lintel. And
This is
2 drops.
to the doorpost. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And yeah. And don't leave your house till morning. Okay. And then God, the angel of death, or God, not the angel, passes throughout Egypt, and passes over the houses with the blood on them. And again, and in verse 24, and you kept it and keep this thing as a custom to you and your sons forever. Okay, and keep this. Sorry. And when you enter the land of Israel that God will give you, keep this custom, even there. Okay, again, marking your doors. As I don't know if you know Jewish homes. If you ever enter a Jewish house, there's a little diagonal thing on the door. This is it. To mark your doors. And if you go to the next chapter, 13, verse 4 to 16. Where is it? Here. Read the English so I won't have to translate on the spot.
You go free on this day in the month of Abib, so that
the Lord in the spring month, in the spring. Okay.
So when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall observe in this month the following practice. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a festival of the Lord. Throughout the 7 days unleavened bread shall be eaten, no leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaves shall be found in all of your territory. Or no leaven, shall be found in all of your territory, and all shall explain to your son, and all of you shall explain to your son on that day, is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt.
Yeah. Okay. So and this text, of where the son is asking, your son will ask you, why are you doing this? And you're supposed to say, and it says this in the Passover text, you're supposed to answer, we do this for what God did for me when I left Egypt. Okay. So you see here in these two passages that you just read, that God is explicitly instituting the Passover holiday, explaining what we are supposed to do on the holiday practically, and explaining what this holiday is for. Okay? This holiday, its purpose, its function, is to deliver eyewitness testimony of those spectacular miracles in an unbroken chain through the ages. Okay? Tell your children and your children's children that this really happened. Okay? Tell them that God really did liberate us from Egypt. Tell them so that the children and grandchildren will know that this is their God, and that they should be grateful to God for what he did for them in the past, and have faith and trust in him today and tomorrow. And again, the son will pass this to the grandson to his son, etc., etc. And here we are 3,000 years later. Okay, so I'll repeat the question that you introduced. Okay, so why does God do it? Why not just start with the 10th plague? Who is he doing it for? Okay, so is he? So the text tells us two things. Okay? He's doing this for the Egyptians. No, he's doing this for the Jews. Okay. So you could say, okay, so he's doing it for both. Fine. Okay. But what's the bigger purpose here? Again, not according to you. Well, not what you think is more important, but according to the text, what's the important audience here?
Israelites.
Why? Why do you say that?
Because it's the Israelites are going to carry on this new tradition. They're going to carry on the law, this whole way of life. And furthermore, when they leave, the miracles keep on happening to them, whereas in Egypt, they kind of go away.
That's a good point. So yeah, so like what I was asking is not why do you think it should be the Jews, but what in the text indicates that it is the Jews. And you're right, okay? The Jews keep getting miracles after they leave Egypt. The Egyptians don't get continued miracles to prove to them, hey, this God really is God. So you're right. So that's one good point. Another is that, I mean, this is weak evidence, but Moses introduces the Israelites to God performs miracles for the Israelites first before he performs miracles for the Egyptians. So maybe that's a hint that the Jews were the primary target, but I think your point is stronger than that, because there's a continuous introduction that God persists with the Jews, not so with the Egyptians. But a stronger hint that of these two target audiences, the Jews are the more important one or the primary one, because in these verses that we just read, you see God instituting a Jewish holiday in which the Jews are ordered to retell and remember the Exodus. But God never commands the Egyptians to retell and remember this. Okay, so on the one hand, the text tells us that both groups are target audiences, but there is evidence, again, these three things that suggest that the primary function of, again, not immediately starting with the 10th plague, but exacerbating, and then providing the coup de grace, that it's to build the relationship with the Jews, to build the faith of the Jews that this God really is an awesome God, and to make it so spectacular through the exacerbation of the crisis that the deliverance will be, again, so amazing, and the plagues on Egypt will be so amazing that the Jews will be talking about this. You need to make it big enough that people will be talking about this for 3,000 years with this kind of, the eyewitness testimony has to be so powerful that it will last through the generations, or it will be effective down the generations. Okay. But in any case, but what's clear, even though, again, we're trying to parse which is the real audience, what's clear is that for both audiences, the Egyptians and the Israelites, in order to achieve what God is trying to achieve vis-a-vis the Egyptians or vis-a-vis the Jews, the butt whooping needed to be prolonged and excessive and painful. Okay, because again, if a single weather event or a single disease had convinced Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, then the Egyptians and the Israelites too might think that it was a fluke. It was some weird but natural phenomenon. Okay, but if they see the Hebrew God repeatedly, day after day after day, performing miracles that overturn the natural order of the world and subjugating the most powerful Egyptian gods, then there's no doubt that this is a divine action authored by the most powerful God in the universe. Okay, and if you, this chapter we're just on, if you go to chapter 14, at the end of the chapter, chapter 30, 31.
So I have
this is after the Israelites cross the Red Sea, which is probably God's most spectacular miracle in the Bible. Okay, so this, go ahead.
Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on shore of the sea. When Israel saw the wondrous power of the Lord, that the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. they had faith in the Lord and his servant Moses.
So the Israelites saw the Egyptians dead on the shore. Israel saw the great power that God wielded over Egypt. And thus the people feared the Lord and believed in God and believed in Moses' servant. Okay, so so again, even though the text tells us, again, that there are two audiences, one is clearly a continuous story that is crowned with success. Okay, because it says a number of times, and the Israelites believed that Moses and Aaron were his servant. They believed that God. They believed. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why I buy into that non-figurative explanation that God purposefully gives crappy plagues that can't convince, because he wants, he wants to perform spectacular miracles. One is not enough. Okay, it needs to make an impression. Okay? And it's this focus on the Jewish audience, I think, clarifies or answers that question that you asked. Why not just offer a miracle from the start? I think this is why, and because God cannot reach into Pharaoh's heart and harden his heart, he has to play games with him. He has to lay a trap for him, like you and I playing a chess match. Okay. Okay. Any questions about this?
No, that makes sense. It's the whole thing was just preparing Israelites who've been whose parents and parents' parents, etc., had been in Egypt as slaves for so long, of the power of the biblical God.
Yeah.
And to make a lasting impression. Yeah. It still needs to be reinforced time and time again.
And again, think of the fact that, look, the only sign that the Israelites had that God exists, that the God of Abraham is still following them after 400 years, still cares, even though evidence suggests otherwise, and that he is here and he's as powerful as legend tells, is that Moses performed this magic trick with a cane in front of them and with a hand. Leprosy, not leprosy, leprosy, not leprosy. That's the only sign they have. Okay? But by the time they leave Egypt, and definitely by the time they cross the Red Sea, this is for sure. Okay? This is an immensely powerful God, and he's on our side. Okay. All right. So next time we'll finish the Moses story. We'll read about. I'll send you the chapters. We'll do the golden calf, the Mount Sinai spectacle, and then Moses' sin and his punishment and death. So we'll finish that and move on to Joshua the next week. Okay?
Okay, sounds great. Look forward to it.